Can you imagine a government uprooting 17 million young people from their homes and sending them to remote villages, not for weeks, but for years? This was Mao Zedong's Down to the Countryside movement, one of the most ambitious social experiments of the Cultural Revolution. To understand why it happened, we need to step back to the late 1960s. In 1966, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution, calling on students to rise up against teachers, officials, and even their parents in the name of revolution. Millions of teenagers formed Red Guard militias. They tore down temples, destroyed books, beat professors in public squares, and paraded so-called class enemies through the streets. By 1968, the chaos spiraled out of control. Red Guard factions weren't just fighting the old world, they were fighting each other. Some cities witnessed armed clashes between rival student groups. Beijing itself became a battleground. Schools and universities shut down almost completely, leaving millions of students idle. Mao faced a problem of his own making. He had created an army of young revolutionaries with nothing to do. And so, he turned to the countryside. The official slogan declared that young people should go down to rural China to be re-educated by the poor and lower middle peasants. Between 1968 and 1980, over 17 million students were relocated from cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou to provinces as far as Heilongjiang in the north and Yunnan in the south. The propaganda promised a romantic return to the soil. Posters showed smiling youths harvesting wheat and learning wisdom from old farmers. But the reality was very different. Most of these teenagers had no farming skills. They arrived in places where life was already harsh. In Heilongjiang, the winters plunged to 30 degrees C. Many lived in crude barracks with no heating. In Yunnan, malaria was rampant, and some sent-down youths died from disease within months. A student from Beijing later wrote in her memoir, "We carried manure, dug ditches, and planted rice. I remember my hands swelling with frostbite. At night, I cried silently so no one would hear." Economically, the movement made little sense. Farms gained labor, but it was the wrong kind. Rural productivity didn't rise. In fact, studies show that in some counties agricultural output dropped by 5 to 7% because locals had to feed and train unskilled outsiders. Meanwhile, the cities lost exactly the people they needed. Educated youth who could have become doctors, engineers, and skilled factory workers. The costs mounted quickly. Local governments were forced to spend enormous sums housing and feeding the new arrivals. By the mid-1970s, provinces like Heilongjiang were spending hundreds of millions of yuan every year to keep the program running. Families in the cities, meanwhile, lost their children's help and often a portion of their income. The sociological consequences were even worse. This was China's lost generation. With universities closed for nearly a decade, millions missed their chance at higher education. When they returned to the cities after Mao's death, they discovered they had no qualifications for the jobs opening up in Deng Xiaoping's reform-era economy. A 1985 survey found that former sent-down youth earned 20–30% less than their urban peers for the rest of their lives. And then there are the personal stories. A Shanghai youth sent to Inner Mongolia recalled working 12 hours a day carrying heavy stones. His reward was a single bowl of millet gruel. Another described watching a close friend die from an untreated infection in a village with no doctor. Some were assaulted by locals, who resented these urban outsiders consuming scarce food and resources. The trauma lasted decades. Many survivors spoke of losing not just their youth, but their faith in the system. One man later wrote, "We were promised that we were building socialism, but all we built was bitterness. We were abandoned, forgotten, and when we returned, the world had moved on without us." By the late 1970s, as Deng Xiaoping came to power, the program was quietly abandoned. Millions of young people poured back into cities, overwhelming universities and job markets. For many, it was too late. They had missed their education, their careers, and the best years of their lives. The Down to the Countryside movement was supposed to forge revolutionaries. Instead, it drained resources, harmed both farms and factories, and destroyed the futures of millions. 17 million sent-down youth. A decade of wasted potential, and a legacy that still shapes Chinese society today.